what do you think, Neil? How did I do? Can I be in your next concert? Oh, wait. This isn't a Neil Young audition? Oh, well, what is this then? Oh, hi, Sophia. Oh, it's the You Spoke, We Listened. Hey, everybody out there in infotex land. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you again about how when you speak, we listen. I don't know if you remember, but earlier this year we did a You Spoke, We Listened short movie in front of our movies that kind of went over, several suggestions that we had gathered from our customers and webinar attendees over the year of 2019. And here we are already. This was just kind of the strength that numbers that we got. And this just kind of proves the old adage that if you show people you're willing to listen to them, they'll speak more. And so we already have, 5 new ideas coming in. And we've got a lot of kudos from our clients on the shorts. They want us to keep the shorts coming. We're actually starting to, realize that, maybe we should make all our movies, short, 20 to 30-minute movies. And then yet the one movie we did this year that was, longer than 20, 30 minutes, it was an hour, was a movie followed by a panel discussion. And seems like everybody liked that panel discussion as well. We are getting, input saying, hey, talk to us more about what you do for us. And so we have updated our what to expect in an incident response test, as well as our what to expect in an audit for our incident response testing clients and our audit clients. But that brings us to our third bullet point, which is we want more technical stuff for technical clients. And, I'm already working on twisting a few arms to get that taken care of. But that actually came out of our movie, What the Cat Seems to Be, which is the one webinar we had that had a lot more technical people came to that webinar than we're used to seeing. So, thank you, technical people, for pulling your technical self away from all of those technical problems that you get to technically solve. We love it, and we'll definitely be working on that. The one that is truly my fault, we've had a debate about it for a long time, but I don't know if you remember, but we always used to, have kind of a 2-minute warning, and we start our webinars 2 minutes late. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to start them on time. The person that came in with that complaint was correct. I mean, we're punishing the people that show up on time for the sake of those who don't. And it's not like our movies start out with a lot of content anyway. So we're going to go ahead and start on time. This last one, out of the hundreds and hundreds of ideas we got, a half of one came in, or, one idea came in saying, hey, love Dan on the harmonica. I'd like to see more of that. And you actually already did in the introduction to this You Spoke, We Listened. So if you give us feedback, we want to get right on it. We're already doing number 1 here. We're already working on number 2. We're twisting some arms. This is the heavy lift for us, but you'll see some technical stuff coming out soon. We're definitely going to start everything on time, and you've already seen me play a different song on the harmonica. So thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for the feedback.
Our lawyers want you to know that when you attend any of our webinars or watch any of our movies, you're agreeing to the terms of service located at the link on the screen. We're also required to provide this abbreviation of what our terms of service include. The main point we need to get across is that regulations change on a regular basis, and we want you to know that what we present can sometimes be very time-dated information or our own interpretation of new guidance or regulations. The materials we present today are subject to change. Also, whenever we provide free boilerplates as part of our webinars or movies, we're required to point out our transfer of copyright agreement, which is also located on our website, in our IT resources library. You can read it by going to the link on the screen. Please also note, by attending an infotex webinar or by receiving any infotex movie, you may be added to our mailing list. We apologize if you'd rather not receive notice of other free education. You can always opt out at the link on the screen. one last thing before we introduce our moderator, Michael Hartke. We'll be initiating a survey directly after the webinar, and we ask you to take a minute to fill it out. We would really appreciate it. And now, it is our pleasure to introduce to you our webinar moderator, the code curator and special envoy from the SEAM, Michael Hartke.
Hello everybody, my name is Michael Hartke. I'm the curator of code here at Infotex and your moderator. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them as you see pictured here. We will make sure they get answered. We'd like to point out destinations on our website, webinars.infotex.com, where you can find our upcoming webinar topics and event schedule, and then also movies.infotex.com, where you can find the movies of these webinars and training videos. Today's webinar is a new format based on feedback from our clients. We call this new format the webinar short, where Dan has been challenged to keep the webinar to 20 minutes or less. Today's webinar short is about incident response diagramming. With all the data flow diagrams we are now required to keep, Dan feels that there is one process that, if diagrammed, would create real value in the diagramming compliance requirements.
Like Mike said before, this webinar is hopefully going to be a really short webinar about incident response diagrams. And so what are we talking about here? Well, we're not talking about data flow diagrams because of the fact that, let's face it, an incident response diagram is a process diagram. But having said that, I'm pretty sure when your auditor asks you for data flow diagrams, if you're out in front of the exam, because guidance doesn't give us a lot of detail on what we're supposed to do when it comes to hitting that one guidance requirement on data flow diagrams. But I feel like if you tell your auditors, hey, we have these 6 data flow diagrams, but we stopped it there because we decided we wanted to diagram processes that were important, your auditor's going to be good with that theory. And one of the most important processes that we have to address in banking is how do we respond when someone made a mistake and we could look bad to our customers? And we call that incident response, right? And so this has kind of arisen out of incident response testing. What actually happened is that we're in an incident response test on a regular basis with our clients, and they start saying, you know what, it'd be nice if we can have some kind of a diagram that we can look at during a panic so that we know that we're following all the right approaches. And actually what kind of inspired our client to request this was that we already had diagrams surrounding test requirements. This is a good example. So what we do when we engage with a client about incident response testing is we say, hey, we're going to have a kickoff meeting, and in that kickoff meeting, we're going to schedule 3 meetings. We're going to schedule a training meeting. We're going to schedule the actual test itself, and then, of course, a meeting to go over to postmortem review. And then I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but then we talk to them about what needs to happen in each of the meetings, and finally, what needs to happen in between the meetings. And so our clients, they see this diagram and they start talking about, that makes it a lot easier for us to understand what we've got to get through in order to do an incident response test. Why don't we have a diagram that helps us understand what we need to do whenever customer information is involved in an incident? And so I'm like, well, are you talking about this diagram? It's a diagram from the NIST cybersecurity standard, and they're like, well, you know what? That's kind of a neat diagram, and it helps us understand the overall incident response process, but it doesn't really drill down on that red square there, 3 over from the right, which is really what we are exercising on a regular basis when we go through our incident response test. And so we ended up coming up with this diagram where we said in any incident,
involving customer information, and in most incidents anyway, first thing we want to do is we want to always document. In other words, throughout the entire process, we're going to be documenting what's going on in the incident. And then the first thing we need to make sure happens is we want to make sure that we're containing the incident, and really the questions that we start asking, and I'm sure you've been through enough incident response tests to realize that what it really is all about is asking the right questions throughout the different sub-processes of the incident response process, right? And so all of our questions at first should be centered around, did we contain the incident? And really what we're talking about is making sure that whatever happened, the impact of that, the severity, whatever you want to call that, whatever your risk assessment lingo is calling it, we want to make sure that the impact does not get bigger than it already is. And user containment, by the way, is a big term that we want you to use in your user awareness training, because if we can contain the incident when the user notices it, we're in a much better position. And we've seen incident responses over the 20 years we've been in business, and what I want you to know is that the quicker you contain an incident, the far less damage that incident's going to cause, right? And so we want our users to know that, hey, when you grow suspicious, you have the ability to stop whatever's happening from getting worse. And what it really all boils down to is that you can disconnect your workstation from all networks. And if that happens to be your iPhone or your iPad or a laptop, it's as simple as going into airplane mode. If you're, at the office, maybe it's disconnecting the workstation from the network. But most importantly, or not most importantly, but one of the things we're kind of running into with our clients that are, for very good reasons, moving to a thin client environment, is that if the incident is, on that thin client environment, if, your user is sitting there, working in the thin client environment, and they take their hand off the mouse and they notice that the cursor is still moving, well, now we've got to have a little bit different of a process than just going into airplane mode, right? We might have to contain the incident by contacting somebody and having that session killed, or what we're seeing some of our clients do, if their thin client environment allows it, is putting an icon on their desktop so that when that icon is clicked, it kills the session. Of course, we want to train our users to be careful there, because they'll lose everything that they have unsaved, blah, blah, blah. But at least we can kill the session if we think ransomware is spreading around our network. The second phase then, or the second part of the incident response process that we've been noticing whenever we do these incident response tests, is once we've confirmed that we've contained the incident, then we know to go ahead and move into analysis. And there's some very important things that need to happen in analysis, and I'll kind of fill us in on all the details there, but suffice it to say that ultimately what we want to do is we want to get our arms around the facts. We of course want to document all the facts, and we just want to make sure that we know everything we can know about the incident before we go too far into the incident response process. And then finally, once we feel like we have concluded a reasonable investigation, the next and most important step probably is to determine, is there a potential for misuse? Now again, this process flow chart is meant for incidents involving customer information. And so, what we need to realize is that we're all banks, and so we get to follow the federal guidance related to incident response and notifying our customers. And what that includes is that if there is no potential for misuse, then we do not have to notify our customers, which, by the way, is why it's a good idea to document everything as we go. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But before I do, let me just propose a couple scenarios. Let's say that somebody sends an email message to D. Hathaway with a whole bunch of information in it that was supposed to go to D. Hathaway. All right, but D. Hathaway happens to be vendor who already has an NDA, who, is willing to sign an agreement saying, hey, I'm not going to do anything with the information they accidentally ended up with, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in that case, there's no potential for misuse. And so if, in the other hand, the email message was sent to D-Halloween, which was a mailing list to 1,000 people that included some names like Hackers Are Us or I Hate Banks or whatever, well, then maybe there's a potential for misuse in that particular scenario. And so if there's a potential for misuse, then what we need to do is we need to notify our customers. And so there's a whole set of things that we need to make sure we do when we notify our customers. That's one of the things we want to exercise in our incident response tests, et cetera, et cetera. And then we want to document. But let's say it's the first scenario where, D. Hathaway has signed the non-disclosure agreement. We've made sure that the network administrators at D. Hathaway's office, say it's an accounting firm or something, have properly destroyed that information. In other words, not only did D. Hathaway delete it from his inbox, but we made sure it was no longer in the deleted messages folder, and we even went out and checked the backups of the Exchange server or whatever to make sure it didn't somehow end up there. That's the documentation we need to get our arms around, is did we do a good job of making sure that that data was properly destroyed? In that case, the documentation is even more important, in our opinion, than the documentation when we're going to notify our customers, which is actually the exact opposite of what we usually see. We usually see our clients document, because we got to notify our customers and there's going to be a lawsuit. And there very well could be, don't get me wrong, but to me, the likelihood of a lawsuit goes up if we decide not to notify our customers. Or maybe better put, if we're doing everything we're supposed to, the likelihood of somebody wanting to sue us goes away when we notify our customers, but remains when we don't want to notify our customers. And so the documentation is even more important when we don't want to notify or when we don't need to notify our customers, is probably a better way of putting that. And then finally, the part that everybody loves the most, because it's where we get the return on the investment. In other words, if we're going to make a mistake, let's treat that as an investment that we get a return on. And so the return on investment in the case of incident response is two things. A, how well did our response process work? And then B, what can we do to prevent this from never happening again? And don't get me wrong, the management team's usually involved in incidents requiring information, customer information, and requiring the ISO to assemble the emergency incident response team meeting, right? And the management team is already jumping to, well, how can we prevent this from ever happening again, way back when we were in the containment phase. And again, we should keep all our questions about containment. We could talk about what we can do to make sure this never happens again during the post-mortem review process. And that's all good, and that's all fine and dandy, and boy, I tell you what, the best thing that comes out of an incident, the greatest return we get from an incident, is that management's on board, especially in answering the question, how can we make sure this never happens again? But the second question, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What can we improve on our process? Is also a question, or really a set of questions, that needs to be answered. And so those questions are also handled in the post-mortem review process. Now, what I also want you to know is that our SIEM, the infotex SIEM, is eventually going to have an incident response wizard that'll actually go so far as, help the team answer and make sure that they're checking off very important tactics that always need to be implemented in an incident response involving customer information. And really, there's a high-level version of it, and then there's a detail-level version of it, because it all depends on how well, trained our team is. And so, these, again, are process documents. They're process drawings. They would not put you in compliance with the data flow diagramming compliance objective you have. but I believe that you would be very well served to have some kind of a diagram that relates back to your own incident response process that your incident response team can refer to when they're probably in a bit of a panic. Now, I keep talking about them being in a panic, but one of the greatest things that comes out of incident response testing is that if we follow the guidance, if we do everything right in the way we respond to an incident, even in those terrible incidents where we are, at fault, quite frankly, where, we are at risk of being sued, that incident, that lemon, can be turned into lemonade. Now, this was my original answer to the question that the management team had in terms of, well, who all is going to know about this? The management team, at least at one of the banks we worked with, was very concerned about who's going to find out about this when. And, to us, it's like, well, transparency, who cares? Well, the management team cares, and we should address that with the management team. And so I brought this diagram back saying, are you talking about this? Who besides the incident response teams involved in an incident? And they're like, well, you know what? That's a good diagram going, forward in terms of preparing. We should be developing relationships with every one of those hexagons on that screen. And that was a good takeaway for that particular bank. But what they were really looking for, and they were satisfied once we delivered this document here, which basically helps us understand who becomes aware of an incident when, ultimately, resulting in our customers becoming aware of the incident in the case of a disclosure incident. And so the point being is that there might be other process diagrams, or in my opinion, this is more of a system diagram. The system is who is aware, and this is showing us all those subsystems, which are the entities that become aware of an incident. But I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope this was short enough to be able to maximize the effectiveness of your time.
And having said that, let me see here. I've already played the harmonica, haven't I? Well, just in case. And after that, I guess I only have one last thing to say, and that is never forget, awareness is 9/11ths of the battle.
Great information as always. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sophia. And thank you for joining us today.
Be sure to check out our movie on how to test your seam, located on movies.infotex.com.